Well, we talk a lot about mentorship and building your tribe on the show and the importance of having a good support system. And today we thought it would be interesting to cover friends at work and what the line is, who you should be choosing to be your friends, because you can be choosy and it's okay to be choosy. And we just thought Alisa would be the perfect person to discuss this topic with. So, Alisa, work friends, what are your thoughts?
I think that if you don't have a work bestie, are you even working? Right? I think that, and I feel like I'm actually speaking to a pair of lovely ladies that met at work and had this relationship develop and look at you both now. And I think that that speaks volumes to connecting with somebody in the workplace because there's that camaraderie. And there's polls and statistics that study that when you have a friend at work, it increases your fulfillment, your productivity, and ultimately company loyalty. Companies should be promoting finding that work bestie, right? Because it gives you that opportunity to have the casual chats and have somebody to take a lunch break with, walk and get coffee to. And I think a lot of people are struggling now because of that lack of contact with your work best friend or your work friends, your crew of people. I hate to use that word, but the people that um, you've become friends with and have established this type of relationship with.
Yep, I can speak from experience. Yes, absolutely. Having a close friend at work can be such a godsend, and it can keep you sane and centered. And there's so many wonderful things about that. And I mean, obviously, Vanessa and I have experienced that. So thank you for bringing that out, Alisa, because it's true, and I feel very blessed by that. Are there things you should be mindful of, or are there lines that you should draw? What are any of the potential pitfalls of having that kind of a relationship at work?
Absolutely. There are certainly boundaries because your work friend is also your colleague. And I think that, it's being mindful of how much you share personally, and what you're confiding in one another. Um, Also recognizing that you're not in competition with this person. And I think that so many times there's been, and I think it's the hierarchy of a 9 to 5 and a corporate company culture is that there's this expectation that you're just supposed to always be the best at your job, and you need to be seen and you need to get promoted, where your work friends become your allies. They're not your competition. And I think that again goes back to your experience with that and building these relationships, makes it more purposeful, makes it more fulfilling, and you're more productive in work. Who you should be friends with and establish those close relationships with, certainly not your boss. It's important to recognize that you may hit it off with your boss and feel like there's a lot of common interests, but there is a line that needs to be drawn in the sand because that person is at the end of the day still your supervisor and you are still their subordinate. So being very careful as to how you toe the line with your relationship with your boss to make it not so personal. Um, I think that with the pandemic, there was an Atlantic article about how the pandemic is really changing those work friendships. And for a lot of people, there's this sense of loss, right? Because you don't have that time to take a walk down the street to pick up a coffee and kind of vent to each other or bounce ideas off of one another. So I think people are trying to figure out ways now to still establish and maintain those relationships in this remote environment. So a lot of people are doing Zoom check-ins, Zoom happy hours, coffee dates on Zoom, and trying to keep that connection. And then on the flip side of that, there are a lot of people that are actually less stressed about those work relationships that are friendships because, we talk a lot about putting yourself out there on this podcast. People are there are a lot of introverts who go into an office every day. And it's important to recognize that not having to interact and engage is a lot less stressful. Somebody, they can do their work, they can separate, and they can disengage. So, yeah.
I want to just touch base on a few things. You spoke about allies, right? Forming allyship within an organization with people that you trust, because trust is a big thing. But I think at the end of the day, respect was the first word that I wrote down, like respecting that person, respecting the space that you have, and respecting your relationship, no matter how it forms. And I want to touch on something that you mentioned right off the bat, because Sue was my boss. Sue was my boss. We completely broke that rule. And I think that sometimes you can't help like who you really have a connection with, right? Like if it is that situation, which it certainly was for us, that first word that I wrote down, I think it becomes key, is respecting that relationship, respecting that person enough and your relationship with that person, that no matter what happens around you, to keep them in your thoughts and consideration on how you approach different things, because I had to be very strategic in that front. And there were moments where I did, like I had struggles, and I came to Sue and I was like, I don't want to put you in a rock and a hard place.
Mhm.
If that ever you feel that way, I want you to tell me and be open and transparent so that I can set myself up in other avenues to have certain conversations where it doesn't put you in an awkward place. So I wanted to verbalize that, because keeping it really real, that's how, I mean, we were and we continue to be work wives, and she is the best work wife for me.
Back at you, girl.
Thank you. But yeah, I think respect is so important. And then how you choose, I think obviously, again, to who you gravitate toward, and it's personality based, right? But you can kind of see in the office the types of personalities you should probably avoid and not feed into, and know that that's just a person within the organization that you don't want to isolate, but that you might just say hello and have your occasional like pleasantries, and the
Mhm.
people that you really want to invest time in to get to know, that you feel you can learn from, and they'll value the relationship just as much as you do.
Yeah. And I think that's an excellent call out. I think it's important. And, I think that there are other people on the other side of that coin that aren't as self-aware, right? Um, that don't know how to not push that relationship when it's not appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, I had a leader on my previous team who we connected really well, both really into hiking and being outdoors. And I remember one Friday I was taking a trip close to where she lives, and she called me and she's like, "Hey, you have a second to jump on a Zoom?" And she opens up her map and she's telling me all the trails to go to. And now she's no longer with the company, and we've established more of where we communicate a lot more and things like that. So it is interesting when you're in an environment too, where you're just like, I just want to be that person's friend. Because I remember always thinking that about the woman who was leading our team, and being like, man, I want to take a hike with her and have a glass of wine with her and just be her friend. And it's definitely been more open, but there's still that very important word that you brought up is that respect. And so I think I may be going back on my initial statement of don't have that relationship with
No,
your
and
boss,
I think it's important. I think you
Mhm.
bring up a valid point, is that
yeah.
usually that's not a line that you potentially want to cross, and especially not immediately, right?
Mhm.
You want to get to know the person, but at the same time, like eh, there's a gut, right? Listen to your gut, and
Mhm.
usually it's gonna steer you in the right direction or protect you from steering in the wrong direction.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important to call out that if, for me, my job is people, and I am consistently in communication with people. I am fascinated by what makes people tick and why people do certain things and act certain ways. And so when I was able to go into an office, and I didn't go into the office very often, more for me, it was more, I'm going to go so that I can show some face and engage with people that I talk to and see on Zoom every day, and go to those occasional company lunches. And that was really impactful in my ability to continue to partner within the company with different hiring teams and things like that. But I think it's important that if you don't find yourself, if you feel like you're isolated in your work environment and you really don't know how to make those friendships, and you feel kind of lonely in your job, I think it's important to, when I was in journalism school and asking people questions, the who, what, where, when, why, I think it's applicable to every aspect of your life. If you're not sure how to strike up a conversation, think of those questions. Oh, what brought you to this company? Or where were you before? What do you do when you're not here? And those kind of questions to just kind of start that dialogue is really important, because I'm a big advocate of having somebody that you can have that relationship with in that work setting. I just think it really does make a world of difference, and you don't feel like you're out on this island by yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we spend so much of our time and build so much of our identities at work. And so, yeah, it is important to have an ally and somebody that you just connect with. And if life puts that person in your way, and it happens to be at work, that's fantastic. And that's a real gift to embrace it. And probably, I can think of other folks that, earlier in my career that we were work friends, and I could tell that they were a little bit lonely in their personal life. And so then they brought some of that into the workplace. So I think it goes back to, having that self-awareness that you were talking about, Alisa, as well as the respect that Vanessa, from both sides, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not wanting to put the other person in an awkward position, whether you're the supervisor or the person being supervised. But just in general, with your peers at work, is not putting too much on somebody in an environment that could be awkward for them, and trying to have a balanced life outside. And all those things are nuanced and difficult, but it's bringing me back in mind to earlier in my career, folks who needed a little too much maybe from their colleagues because they spent so much time there, and having to navigate that. Separately, what about when you build a close friendship with somebody at work of the opposite sex? How do you navigate that in a professional way? Because I've had those situations too, where I've made a friend at work and it's a male, and we end up, taking a long lunch together or spending a lot of time talking together, and people are like, and it's it's not, there's nothing there, but
Mhm.
How do you handle that?
I think it's also contingent upon what's happening in your personal life too. If that relationship is going to be disrespectful to something that's happening, if you have a spouse. So I think it's really important, and self-awareness is key, right? I have several male colleagues that I've established friendships with, and I think keeping it within that professional setting. We had a Whole Foods down the street, walking to Whole Foods and getting a smoothie, and, catching up on what's going on their, within their work. I think really being mindful and self-aware of the boundaries that are established within that relationship. I do think that if the work friendship is outside of that 9 to 5, and I know that 9 to 5 is not so 9 to 5 anymore, but if there's activities that are happening and there are, spouses or whatever the case might be involved, make it a group thing. And, if there's trivia nights or work dinners and things like that, I think it's really important, again, to maintain those boundaries. I think people are going to talk no matter what situation you're in. So you have to just be mindful of ignoring, as long as it's not in any way, shape, or form jeopardizing your relationship within the company. I think it's really important that, again, be self-aware, set boundaries, and have group activities.
Great advice. So I want to touch on something, Alisa, that I think most people can relate to. You formed a friendship, and something happens where things kind of go awry, and now you're at work and have to see this person every day. I know we common sense, right, should kick in. However, for the sake of this show, tips for how to progress in a professional environment with the person that you have decided to no longer engage in a friendship anymore that you work with.
Keep it simple, keep it civil. And I think, those ways you're there to do your job first and foremost. Uh, Niceties, be respectful, and just know that you try to continue to step outside of that personal relationship that was established. Um, I think that if it becomes a bigger issue, if there's drama that ensues as a result of this friendship kind of fizzling, I think it might be beneficial to, we talk a lot about communication, is maybe have a conversation like, hey, can we grab a coffee? Like, I know things might not necessarily be like they were, but we do have to work together. So let's just figure out a way to be respectful of each other and maintain a civil relationship for the sake of our jobs.
I love that. Keep it simple, keep it civil.
And
Yep.
be human and be adults about it.
Yes.
Right? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a great conversation. Thank you, Alisa.
Thank
Yeah.
you.